Well, I'm delighted to be here, and the topic of STEM is very, very close to my heart, and also the way design and STEM intersect. I've sort of have been around and working in this space for a very, very long time. And when I started out, it was unheard of to sort of move from design in the creative sector into STEM. But I managed to successfully finish an undergraduate degree in fashion and textile design, and I worked in London Fashion Week for a couple of years before I realised that I wanted to do more with my life and my brain. And back then it was a very different space, the sort of London Fashion Week scene. And I I came across the idea of research, and to cut a long story short, I successfully completed a PhD in engineering design at Bath University. So I completely transcended the boundaries, and the benefits of that have underpinned the work and the research that I've done ever since. So I'm going to talk to you about sustainable fashion, our hot topic for today. And just quickly, I'm going to sort of talk about give you an overview of, what sort of elements and factors sustainable fashion covers. So obviously we have garments, and garments have a very important role in terms of physiological protection. So we wear clothes so we don't get cold, and we don't bump into things, and it sort of protects our bodies. But increasingly, the more we sort of occupy a built environment, there's a psychological element about feeling comfortable, the way we look, the way we communicate our identity. So this idea of personal style, image and identity is really, really important. However, the industry, as we've been finding out from the press over the last few years, increasingly has a significant impact on our environment, on the planet, but also on communities. What I'd also like to do quickly is sort of touch on the role of the individual as well, so what we could do as citizens. So, the fashion industry is terrible at the moment, and has been, certainly increasingly over the last sort of 50 years. And as you can see from some of the recent statistics, it's responsible for about 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And we know that greenhouse gas emissions are directly linked to the increase of global temperature. So the idea is that we try and sort of prevent that, and certainly the Paris Agreement sort of set out a framework hoping that we sort of don't exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius within the next sort of couple of decades. But this slide here just sort of represents each sector of the value chain. So the fashion industry is really complex. We've got materials, we've got lots of steps within the value chain, and we have things being shipped all over the world to have different things done to them, manufactured in China, coming over here, being finished somewhere else. There's a lot of movement around the world with products before as they're being produced. The production of the fibres and the raw materials themselves are highly problematic. We've got, for example, a quarter of the fibres that are produced and consumed annually are from cotton. And although a lot of us believe that cotton is, obviously it's a natural fibre, therefore it must be good for the environment, it's actually quite terrible. It is, whether it's organic or not, it has significant impact on biodiversity where it's grown. It's very thirsty in terms of water consumption. There's a lot of ethical issues And organic cotton is a massive, has got a lot of ethical issues linked to it, a lot of inequality, and I could go on for ages. It's bad. Let's put it that way. And more recently, we've had the wonderful invention of fast fashion, where the idea is that clothing is turned around very quickly, it's very low value, it's cheap to buy, and therefore it's disposable. However, the impact on this new practice on the environment is horrendous, and it's having a significant impact on accelerating our transition to global emissions and global warming. It's just accelerating the process. So one of the other things that happens when we dump clothing, we might think it's made from cotton. Cotton is natural, it biodegrades. Wool is natural, it biodegrades. But what we don't think about is all the chemicals that have gone into colouring that. And so once the fibre itself breaks down, the chemicals leach out into the environment and poison the soil, create all sorts of, enter the water systems. Awful. And then we have the social impacts. Again, this is no secret, there's terrible practices that happen across the world. As consumers and as businesses in Europe, we're trying hard to be more accountable and try and support making sure that the countries that we're working with, which are less developed, are benefiting from the growth in the fashion industry and the jobs, but sadly that's not the case everywhere. So there's also huge social impacts. So here's I just had a bit of a brainstorm and was trying to work out how broad the social impact issues are, and it starts from labour exploitation, and we do have this even in the UK, where we have sweatshops still in various parts of the country. There's child labour, which we're very aware of. There's a lot of gender inequality. There's women are the primary workforce, make up the primary workforce, and the stories of discrimination and problems are in the media all the time. There's also social impacts that are closer to home, and we talked about mental health earlier. There's huge pressures from social media and about body image, and that has really got has a real knock-on effect on the mental health of young people. And then we've also talked about waste management and how chemicals are leaching into the environment and into the water streams, but also the build-up of rubbish around communities. It really does impact the health of the citizens, people living near the sites where garments are discarded or even manufactured. So there's a direct link to the people's health and mental health. And then, the really dark side of the human rights violations, which is a serious topic as well. So anyone who thought that the fashion industry was glamorous, think again. So, what is sustainable fashion? What is it? Who can define it? All I can say is that it's an umbrella term. It means everything and nothing. And so, essentially, what we mean with sustainable fashion is trying to create products or think about ways that we can create garments and apparel in a way that doesn't impact the environment, doesn't deplete our natural resources, doesn't pollute the planet, and doesn't do harm to people and communities. So in case you weren't depressed enough. Yeah. And what this is really highlighting is if we don't do something now, it's going to get really bad really quickly. And it's no mystery to sort of put two and two together. And unless we make a change, the industry changes very significantly. There's no way our contribution, the industry's contribution, is going to help meet the global warming targets outlined in the Paris Agreement. So. Just to sort of summarise and sort of build this picture, to really, in case you haven't worked out that this is urgent, I've put this slide together to show you that what will happen if we don't do something about it. So 70% increase in waste, just from the fashion industry, 90% of biodiversity loss, water stress, which has huge impact on communities that are the ones that are growing cotton in particular. But interestingly, and this is where my own personal research focuses on, is that actually there's an opportunity here. We could reduce the environmental impact of a product and its impact during the design phase, not just the material selection, which is what we tend to sort of use at the moment. We tend to focus on using sustainable materials or sustainable fibres, and so putting the agency onto the materials science space, the textile technology space. Actually, there's so much more that designers can do that could make a really significant difference. So we're in a Wild West situation here with sustainable fashion, in case you haven't worked it out. There's a big sort of, big push, all the media, all the sound bites that are coming through, influencers and the press, and everyone is saying, oh my God, this is terrible, we've got to do something about it. Okay. The problem has been flagged up. What do we do about it? That's something that we're still very unclear about, and so there's a vacuum. And to fill that vacuum, we have lots and lots of different initiatives, all mean different things. So we've got things like organic cotton, certifications, got various standards, but no one of these means that a product is sustainable. And in fact, what fashion brands do a lot of the time, and this is going to shock you, is they sign up to the ones that make them look the best. So, there's still a lot to be done, a lot of thinking that needs to be done, a lot of infrastructure, and it's not just, a fashion designer or just a textile designer. There's a lot of work that sort of needs to be done in order to begin to sort this mess out. There are some positive things happening. And the examples that I'm going to give you sadly have come from our the actions have really come from Europe, who we've decided we didn't want to be friends with anymore. We know that, you may or may not be aware, but on the 3rd of July in 2021, it became illegal to have single-use plastics in Europe. Okay? That was a milestone event, but it took about 15 years of planning, and certainly because I work along with the European Commission, looking at various funding that they put into new technologies, material technologies. The thinking that sort of resulted in this day started 15 years before. There was 150 million euros that went into developing alternative packaging materials. So it's not perfect, but there's a lot we can learn, and there's certainly having a significant impact in terms of single-use disposable plastic items. We've got the Fashion Pact, which basically is a group of very sort of high-end fashion designers, fashion brands like Gucci and Chanel getting together and agreeing that something needs to be done. What exactly is a good question, but the good thing is that they agree that something needs to be done. We also have the United Nations have really been looking at this for a few years as well, and they've come up with a really sort of, they've done a lot of research, very rigorous research, and have come up with some ideas, have come up with some proposals, and a sort of a roadmap that would help the textile and fashion industry move towards a more sustainable trajectory, more circular trajectory. And then the most interesting bit of legislation that's come through, or is coming through, is the Eco-Design Directive. So originally the Eco-Design Directive was focused on electrical goods. So now when you try and buy a fridge or something like that, it has to have a rating on it, whether it's A, B, C or D. That has come through EU legislation, again similar to the single-use plastics. But what has, in the last couple of years, what's interesting is that the European Commission put forward a proposal to the European Parliament to extend the reach of the Eco-Design Directive. So anything manufactured or imported into Europe will need to meet certain criteria. That's currently at consultation phase. The framework that was put forward was accepted by Parliament, so they're hoping, the idea is that this is implemented by 2030. So what that means is essentially there's a legal framework in place. So we may not be part of Europe, but we will be trading with Europe, and we would not be able to send products over to them unless they meet this criteria. And I'm hoping that, we will adopt some of these practices and, really, adopt this idea of legislation, because unless it's the law, industry is not going to, the certificates I showed you earlier and the standards, they're all voluntary. So that means, you could take it or leave it. But once it becomes a legal requirement, that's when the transformation in the industry will happen. So I've been watching this Eco-Design amendment, this sort of revision for the proposal for extending the framework closely, because and what is really interesting is that it really does focus on the design phase. It really does look at ways in which we can communicate, brands and manufacturers can communicate about the sustainability of the ecological footprint of the products that they have. So you'd be able to get a jacket that has a digital passport, and it tells you a bit like your fridge how it rates. And of course, that implies that there will be standards below which you wouldn't be able to, you'd have substandard products that don't quite meet the eco regulations. Again, this is it's sort of very top line, and so the details have have not been worked out, and this is certainly one of the things that we're looking at from my research group in particular, trying to sort of understand what that means for the UK. But it's a step, in my view, it's a step in the right direction, and it's sort of foregrounding where the industry will be in the next 5 to 10 years. And so, there's obviously, it's not an easy thing to implement any of these frameworks, and if it was, we would have done it already. But there are significant challenges that we need to navigate. I've listed a few of them here. Obviously, we have a culture of fast fashion. You know, it could be the people in this room and people within our networks that we know are switched on, but not everybody is. I'll give you an anecdote. I went up to Newcastle for a symposium, where are we now? Last Monday. And I was up with a colleague. We got out of the train into a cab, and the colleague and the cab driver, in his Geordie accent, I'm not going to try and do it because I'm rubbish, said, "So ladies, what are you here to do? Why are you visiting Newcastle?" And we said, "Oh, we're here to attend a symposium on sustainable textiles." And he said, I'll tell you this," he said. It was my birthday, and my wife took me to Bosch, and she bought me a really nice t-shirt for £100. He said, when I took it home, I looked at the label, and it was 80% recycled cotton. And his response was, "I felt cheated, I'm never going to shop there again." And my colleague and I started to question our life choices. So just because we all believe it, we understand it, does not mean that everybody does. And this is an issue. The vast majority of the general population of young people are aware, but there's different levels of awareness. When I talk to industry, the first thing they say to me is, "Well, this is going to cost too much. Forget it." You know, we're sort of have very few policies and sort of regulations in place here in the UK. I mean, it's across the board, which is why Europe is taking action. But you know, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that space. So we don't have industry saying, "Oh, well, it's too expensive." You know, they've got to do it. And of course, we have resistance to change. So the point I want to make is that these issues require cross-disciplinary approaches in order to address and tackle. Somebody studying law or just the legal profession cannot sort the problem out. Just fashion brands cannot sort the problem out. What we need is a cross sort of interdisciplinary approach to tackle these issues. And it starts with, we don't have people that can speak across disciplines. We're not, you know, we're sort of, this is one of my pet peeves, you know, kids at school. I've got 2 children, a 15-year-old and a 9-year-old. You've got STEM and you've got creative subjects. The two never meet, okay? That is a missed opportunity. I do a lot of work with the Design and Technology Association, and who look at the curriculum for GCSE, well, across Key Stage 1 all the way through to A-levels, and they tell me their numbers. You know, something like 500 students might take Design and Technology for GCSE, and that drops to half for A-level. You know, and this is tragic because this is the opportunity. This is where design and STEM meet. So there's a serious issue with education, and if we're going to create a future where any industry, you know, whether it's fashion and textiles, whether it's music, whatever, if we're going to address these challenges that are global, we're going to need to be able to join the dots between our communities and between our disciplines and ourselves. And we need to be able to collaborate and discuss with each other. And, you know, just because you study art or design undergraduate, it doesn't mean, or you're interested in art and design, it doesn't mean that the STEM subjects aren't important. You're going to need to speak with an environmental scientist at some point. You're going to need to collaborate with an engineer potentially. You need to have the tools, the vocabulary, the understanding to be able to cross those boundaries. And sadly, we're not doing that at the moment. And it's the same at the undergraduate level as well. So there's a lot of work. And on that cheery note, there's a question that you could ponder. But yes, I'll leave you there. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronika.